Welcome back to Decolonize Cannabis. This will be episode 4 of volume 2, featuring a special guest from Manitoba. Some of you watching by YouTube might recognize Sharon Blady, our former Minister of Health, and currently involved with the Indigenous Bloom outfit at 2 levels, and one being the Indigenous Bloom Hemp Corp, as well as a fellow LPFN Independent Cannabis Board member. And recently, and I'm looking forward to learning a little more about your own personal enterprise, which is you call Speak Up, and that is mental health and neurodiversity. So yeah, it's going to be a dynamite discussion. I know that it's probably going to be over the top, especially some of what you have to say. So I'm all ears. I guess I'll let you take it away with a bit of an introduction on yourself and where everything's fitting into the cannabis industry for you.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's really cool to be here with you. And again, meeting outside of our normal work together. And again, for me, a lot of it, even my involvement, comes actually from a mental health background, and comes from the fact that I was the Minister of Health here in Manitoba when the federal government was starting to finally make a move on this, introduce the legislation. And, we just passed the 3-year anniversary, and I'd really been hoping to still have that job, 3 years ago, and make sure that we rolled out the legislation well here in Manitoba. And that's part of my reason for the interest in getting involved now that I'm outside, is because I know what the conversations were on the inside and how we could have done things better. And I get that this was a big prickly ball for some folks, that they didn't know how to roll it out. But I think there's a lot of things that we can learn, especially in the past 3 years. And that comes from everything from how there was a lot of fear mongering about what was going to happen. And there's also a lot of missed opportunities that had things been rolled out differently. I think there would have been a much more open and equitable marketplace. And I also think, interestingly enough, there was a lot of stuff that actually was made harder with legalization than, the extra rules, what happened here in Manitoba and some other places where it was just, it was just a little interesting. And listening to, for example, governments or other folks saying like, they lost money or this, I'm like, how do you, how is this just not a cash cow? And how is, so there's a lot of stuff like that. But again, I'm looking forward to diving into all of that with you.
Well, I mean, right off the bat, when you mentioned that, as far as each province obviously adopting and applying their own system moving forward, another way to look at it exactly, as far as if that is the case, if it isn't a cash cow right now with plentiful stakeholders involved, then maybe what's been done obviously isn't working, and like identifying the obvious. So when we take it even further than that in this discussion with what we've begun to work together with and what we're moving towards, like as a community now, say in the broader cannabis community, is that exactly on Manitoba's situation, highlighting initial concerns in the overall umbrella of lack of consultation in terms of Indigenous inclusion, a fair seat at the table, and the developments moving forward to the evolution of the industry as it is in Manitoba, now going on 3 years. And during the 3rd year, despite those lacks of consultation initially, getting things going, Indigenous Bloom coming to the forefront that we've had it at, obviously, and then looking forward at moving ahead. So, I mean, there are Indigenous owned and Indigenous invested cannabis stores that are in operation. And I wrote recently in a 3-part dialogue about this with respect to my region, and wanted very, very much so to have the conclusion to remain very raw content to the Canadian style and the formatting. Specifically highlighting those areas of concern, so that the truth coming out in that situation is for the general reader or cannabis support system and support group, peers, everybody that's involved, to actually see beyond the potential smearing that happened, say again with miscommunication on Health Canada quality assurance measures, which every grower, producer, or retailer goes through, and then our situation kind of being lost in limbo at a time of transition of government, with the premier stepping down and everything else kind of stretching out. doing what I could to make sure that that stays on the radar, that
Mhm.
not only is it a present loss in opportunity where the plight to get involved was already, you know, a hurdled system, like not, you know, if not point A
Yeah.
to B. And then on top of it, coming to the realization that the policies in place actually encourage other retailers to partner or engage with Indigenous owned on reserve entities to you know, to basically obtain a speedy process in the application. So that type of information specifically bringing out a lot has to do with the projections I would like to obviously see coming out of Indigenous cannabis. And so again, I'll turn it over to you. You were there at the kickoff, you know, you've been in legislation, you've seen those powers and applying mostly right now with Winnipeg moving to remove medical cannabis, tying in some of that information. What could, you know, Manitoba medical cannabis production look like, or recreational on the larger Indigenous scale?
Well, and I think one of the things that happened was a real opportunity that was missed out right at the beginning. And again, had I still been able to be at the table right up until that time, was knowing that especially when we talk about this idea of either medical or again, going, you know, maintaining Health Canada standards, all those kinds of things. There were folks before that had licenses to produce medical marijuana, mostly for their own consumption. And so these were folks that there was an entire knowledge base, an entire cottage industry that was there that you could have easily, you know, that could have been one of your first rounds of conversion. And again, I get that there might not be the same value, but I mean, I think one of the funniest conversations that I ever had was when this was all coming up. And, you know, political staff are always very, you know, diplomatic, and they want to, you know, make sure that they're not overstepping their boundaries. And I remember the conversation that, you know, my political staff came in as health minister, and they were like, okay, so this is going to be, there's going to be a briefing on this and this, and then we're not sure where you know, you fit on this. They're not making any assumptions. And I was just like, okay, yeah, you don't have to be so cautious with me for starters. And when they were, you know, talking about certain things, I'm like, you're acting, you know, again, I get it. You're deferring. You don't know. You're erring on the side of caution. It's like, you want to know where my son is right now? My son at the time, the young woman he was going out with, her stepfather, actually was a medical producer because of his own disability issues. And so, you know, her stepdad and mom were off on a trip, and those two were basically maintaining the grow op in the basement.
Right.
And so that he could, because he couldn't leave the plants for that long without attention. So he had been taught to do all of this, had been, you know, so that was his introduction, was somebody that basically explained each and every single plant and why it was there and where that fit into his own medical needs. And the fact that he had to have a variety of plants, and that, well, you know, it wasn't just one guy growing one plant. And but also seeing the fact that one person was producing so much that there was no way they could consume it all, but at the
Right.
same time was having to maintain it. And I sat there going, okay, so how many other people like him are out there? And especially the fact that he was on disability. So it was a case of, there was a whole bunch of people that we could have, you know, literally converted over, can transition them. And it could have been, you know, it's really interesting when we think about what happened with liquor, and we went from that swing, you know, you had prohibition happen in the States. And, you know, I even think of my own growing up, and it was the whole, what we grew up with, 3 different kinds of beer. And then all of a sudden, ooh, you know, we have all these craft brewers. And I'm like, we had this opportunity with cannabis to literally go in at that craft stage first, and
Right.
not let the, you know, the corporate entities in. And we could have done so much where they could have, again, I get that the volume might not be there the way some folks think, but you had enough different folks that could have been able to continue to grow for themselves, offer that level of expertise, quality, and then they could have been able to take their excess and, you know, move that into something. And that could have been a way of supporting folks. It would have been ensuring high quality stuff. Not, am I
Right.
saying that it's easy? We could have sorted out all the nuances, you know, over a weekend? Probably not. But the point was, there was a whole bunch of folks like that displaced, while you had other folks, you know, and I mean, I will, Fantino's I'm not a big fan of him. I lived in Toronto while he was out there arresting folks left, right, and center. And to be the first guy that jumps in, or one of the first folks that, comes in, big corporate, boom, I'm going to line my pockets. I'm sorry, but you don't get to sit there busting folks, on a street corner for having a joint and then turn around, how many, flip of a coin later and suddenly you're profiting off that. Sorry, not cool. So it was that kind of stuff. And then I think honestly, in terms of the Indigenous aspect of it, again, we could have done what did happen in a lot of US states where when they did start to legalize, the first thing that they looked at was basically, how do we make amends? Who's got charges right now? Who served time for like simple possession and all of these other things, or for having grow ops where we've basically penalized folks for being on the wrong side of the law at this one window, but now we're going to turn around and reward a suit for the same behavior. It was a case of, okay, you got arrested for doing a thing that's legal now. What can we do? And again, all of that, the knowledge base. I mean, again, you've clearly got people that know their product, know their marketing. And again, were they having to do it, on the margins and outside of the law before? Yes, but they still know what. Again, they're your experts, and they were just arrested for being experts before. We could have done that. And we know that Indigenous folks are overrepresented within the justice system. And that could have been a huge act of reconciliation to go, okay, because it's not like, it all became legal and everybody was able to suddenly walk into these little bougie boutiques and buy really overpriced stuff and fancy packages one day. But it wasn't like that same day anybody that was still incarcerated for possession was suddenly getting, let out, getting a pardon and getting the slate clean. And I think a lot more could have been done there. And it could have been done on two fronts. One, again, it's all legal now, so what are you doing in jail for it? And then second of all, again, if folks were already socioeconomically marginalized, and that's part of the reason why they were doing what they were doing, then why not, again, as part of that reconciliation, go, okay, so now what can we do? And how can we, swing the balance back the other way and make up for it? Because I think that one of the biggest insults was literally that, great, it's legal. And, that made it all easy and wonderful for the average affluent, suburbanite who didn't like, having to buy their stuff from a sketchy place here, there, and whatever. And, that now I can walk in, in my yoga pants with my Starbucks. And I think one of the things that floored me was the first time I walked into a shop with my kids and it was like, well, this is kind of bougie. And why is there a Holt Renfrew? Like, why is there Holt Renfrew branding on this stuff? I mean, holy, I wasn't, I was expecting a little bit of an upgrade from the head shops in the neighborhood, but like, but I certainly, that wasn't branding that I was anticipating, that wasn't a logo. I was like, ooh, got to get my high end, whatever, pipe and what, it was weird. It was just seriously weird. And to me, that spoke to that where we dropped the ball, because it shouldn't have gone from illegal to bougie in like that.
Exactly. Yes. That you nailed so many topics there, especially pulling in the Ontario again, like because really what we're talking on here and missed opportunity and what we're looking at is being capitalized yet again so now over in Ontario with the brick and mortar system and the Ontario Cannabis store, right? So we have that in play. But what's coming to fruition there is what we're discussing here at a different level, the farmgate system. So where you're looking at very small craft quality controlled product produced on site with retail available on site, so you're kind of like your farm to table operation.
Yeah.
And that here like is so I like that you brought it up because it rings in a number of different situations for me, especially in all of that dialogue you threw down. One, previously, I was also a correctional officer. And as a correctional officer, I was also prescribed medical cannabis. And then nearing the end of toward my resignation, had begun the paperwork for the ACMPR to produce my own medical cannabis. And it was a very awkward situation in that environment. As far as disclosure and that, but it also was pre-legalization, right? So, I mean, the whole spirit of the law, letter of the law applied heavily in that zone. And then at the same time, though, at disclosing that and bringing that to the forefront, I had also obtained status in the Indigenous awareness training, right into the to the central level of correction. So to a question whether or not my abilities as my commitment in those roles, right, to the use of cannabis at the time, that became conflicting. And fortunately, though, looking ahead of the time, at a time when not understanding the concept of farmgate operation, looked at the probabilities of cannabis legalization, only coming on that time within about a year. And so consulting moving forward and consulting in Indigenous services, which I was familiar to, including economic development and agri-development, was that exactly what we're at now. When the time would come that legalization happened, captivating cannabis into that, what missed opportunities, like we're talking here though, in that 2018 situation, is that exactly the total lack of consultation, despite of the reconciliation that was on the table and the recommendations that were coming to light, as well as UNDRIP. And then furthermore, the rollout of the industry here in Manitoba, without that real Indigenous backbone involved right off the get-go of saying, these are all the avenues that we can utilize through these recommendations or through UNDRIP at this section, and let's get more people set up. That's exactly what I would see now as far as the reconciliation goes. Like even moving forward, if you were to read those 3 pieces I published, the first indication, a discussion with a non-Indigenous cannabis retail owner, but familiar to Indigenous economic development over a span of, say, 2 decades. And the ultimate inclusion scenario they identify within Manitoba would be like a site like the Kishkamakwa Center in Portage, or any other ideal high traffic zone that we could look at, being more of a hub, not just a cannabis production and sale, but really utilize, like, so when you look at it that way, that's essentially what it would come down to, like a farm gate tourist attraction operation kind of style. And Ontario's kicking them off right now. So when I look at all of this stuff, Winnipeg booting, medical growers out, the stipulations between the Indian Act and the Cannabis Act, the grounds that really need to be covered and made, like, the reconciliation that really needs to happen in repairing those relationships to move forward, that farm gate opportunity placed into Indigenous communities is pretty much one of is a golden opportunity. So it's still there, all the policies in place for it. The review just ended, right? We're kicking off the next 3 years, but that's where decolonized cannabis is at. That's where the dialogue is going. Most of it keep coming in. Fleurysh Ventures Ltd, same deal. The services we provide, this type of dialogue, if it captivates you, that's exactly, if it's not being a guest with us at the show, then ultimately it is whether we can come and speak to more people in public, or, working with more people to bring the same message to the idea of as well. There's room for everybody.
Well, exactly. And I think so much of it really does come down to education and knowing the history, and knowing that, so much of what's happened really does come down to corporate capitalist agendas, for lack of a better way, and colonization. Sorry, right. In my previous life, I was also a decolonization scholar. So, and you and I probably need to talk genealogy, because I'm also a Fleury on my mom's side. So
cool. Awesome. Well, time to flourish.
So, familiar with all of this stuff, and it's this idea of the history and what's happened, and that what ends up happening is that, legalization of different, happens because, yes, there might be that kind of, here's the moment in time, but also there's other things. And I mean, again, from a legislative perspective, here in Manitoba, we talk about being the, for example, we were the first province for women to get the vote. But when you think about what was happening in the world at the time when Manitoba and other places were giving women the vote, it wasn't necessarily because they were hotbeds of feminists, they weren't burning trails that way. It actually turned out that it was in the powers that be best interests to do this thing. And so a lot of times when we have something that goes forward legally, progressive folks will be like, yay, we're finally there. But a lot of times there's somebody off on the side that is not that progressive, and they're like, I'm doing this because it's there's a vested interest for me. So they're not, and this is what I worried about when we went forward with legalization, and why I had issue with how we did things here in Manitoba, because you went from a government that did have a much more progressive approach to this, to folks that were part of the whole, like, you know, this is the devil's lettuce and it's the gateway to this and yada, yada, yada,
Right.
yada. Like they were so anti-drug. I mean, dude's actually anti-Halloween, which is a whole other thing, but you know, off on a tangent, but talk about you're like sucking the fun out of any equation. And so when you have somebody like that, that's in charge of bringing in the legislation, you know that it's not going to be in folks' best interest. And, you know, the fact, well, a good example was, so the idea that you could consume on your own, in your own property, but you could not do that in a rental unit. So all of a sudden, this is before my kids bought their house, which during the pandemic, but I remember legalization suddenly meant that my son and his partner were showing up at my house because they couldn't consume anything that left a smell in either of their apartments. So, I mean, you know, we had some nice family visits and all, but it was just really funny when it's like, you got to go run to mom's house. Why? Like, because you don't want your lease, like, wait a second. The part that's ironic is that pre-legalization, yes, you may have had an issue with your landlord, but your landlord actually had less legal teeth, because it was a case of, you know, I smell something in your apartment. Oh, I don't know where that came from, or oh, my buddy. But now it was a case of that smell came from your apartment, therefore it was consumed in your place, therefore boom, boom, boom. So ironically, like the wrong people got empowered by that. It just seemed like it just seemed a little backwards. So there were things like that, or again, in terms of what, you know, again, the amount that you could grow at home, what you could do, all of these kinds of things, even the stuff like, I mean, again, as somebody that believes that the liquor, like, you know, Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries and having a liquor mart the way we do has actually been really good for corporate social responsibility versus only private liquor sales. I mean, because private liquor sales profits go into somebody's private pocket. Here, when the government, you know, sells the bulk of the liquor, well, the profits go into corporate social responsibility. They go into healthcare to treat those folks that may have conditions associated with alcohol use. So it was use and this kind of stuff. So I see a role for, you know, for that entity. I just don't think that they played it out the same way. And then I think for a lot of folks, even our understandings of how, again, liquor is distributed impacted how we then translated that to cannabis. And rather than learning from it, I think in some cases we replicated it. Or like I said, even thinking about the difference between liquor and cannabis, you know, most, you don't go down the street and go, oh, there's the Smirnoff shop, and then there's the Coors shop, and then there's the, you know, like you don't have each alcohol producer having their own standalone store for their products. It either ends up in something, again, if you're here in Manitoba, something, a liquor mart, fine, it's got, they funnel in everything. Or even again, if you look at other jurisdictions where it's private, it's still the same thing. It's much more that supermarket kind of approach, right? Everything comes through and then it's what you choose to put on your shelves. Well, if you're looking at, you know, at, again, somebody that it is doing the literally, you know, farm to table, that's a different thing, but you're also going to have some of those smaller producers. And I don't think they factored in all the different types and coming up with a system that would allow for it, and even allow for things, you know, in terms of how you produce and then how you get that stuff on the shelves and what the rules and regs are. Because it sounds really silly when you've got to say, well, you know, you can only purchase from this supplier. And it's like, well, but if I'm growing my own stuff, so I got to sell it to the government, then like,
yeah,
like, you know, like there's those kinds of things where you're just like, I you know, and again, I'm not going to allege that, you know, my team, you know, it wasn't like we were, you know, I don't know how you put this, you know, we just had a different sense of it, and we weren't perfect, but we just realized that what you needed to do was consult, and that the first people that you needed to consult with were the people already doing it. And, you know, and then also consulting with Indigenous folks, because if this is a whole new economic opportunity, then yeah, you hold the place for them first.
Yeah.
There's going to be no shortage of white upper class capitalists wanting to get in on this. How about we make them wait their turn for a change? You know, wacky, crazy idea.
Standardization all around is for sure lacking, and I mean it's trial and error for sure. But again, it's been 3 years, so those
and we also lacked a
indicators.
research body, right? Like this is the thing, when something's illegal, you can't study it. So a lot of this stuff we're literally learning right now. Not that other people didn't have informal knowledge, but yeah, part of our standardization issue was actually the fact that stuff was illegal and you couldn't, do the research you needed to do.
That can be a bit of a benefit as well, though. I mean, because it does allow for a large buffer zone as far as, because I for example, I can say that I'm participating in cannabis research under the federal umbrella from the Purity IQ and Hemp and Research Project. So from the literally umbrella effect top down, even though I'm a medical licensed home grower, I'm able to channel my grow technique, my grow space, everything I can channel into that research project and also share it for educational purposes without infringing on regulation. You know what I mean? So it's not like getting more people to participate. One, it's getting more people to become more outspoken, but more importantly, with all of that in play, especially why, because like you've acknowledged that, and like, I doubt I'm the only person operating their SOR 2018-144 with quality assurance measures, and then ultimately applying peace of mind control, right? I mean, peace of mind to the equation, and controlling the number that you produce opposed to the number allotted, right? So that's a big factor for us. And like, when I think about it still at the end of the day, and now that I'm going to be moving to have that product sampled, the farmgate reality becomes much more of a situation that could be an arm's reach with this ongoing research. And the reason I say that is, if I'm medically producing 2 strains that I'm participating in research that are going to have analytical basically COAs, right, to my level of home production, saying that they're Health Canada certified, safe for consumption, and they're ideal medically for these ailments plus the cannabinoid levels. Well, if that project was to bloom or flourish any more, then the next step for someone like me would be able to register and also medical for sale that same product to other patients requiring that similar strain. So I mean, those systems, it's interesting because here we are on Home Grow. We're on we're doing podcasts to share the education, but yet I bet through our own each involvements provincially and federally, there is a intrinsic system involved where just a little bit of braiding included, we could be looking at a farm gate situation that's not far off being licensed, right? I mean, you're looking at the site location and that. We look at reserve land or even Métis and Inuit occupancy as far as land occupancies, or in organizations with stakeholdership, obviously not for profit or for-profit organizations where they can become economically developed, right, or involved. But I mean, it's all there. It's all up for the dialogue in coming episodes. I thank you very much for joining us. I know we could go definitely.
Oh, we could go hours. I know.
Fortunately for me, I'm going to have more opportunities to sit with you privately and learn more about you. We're going to hit the family tree. Anyone wanting to hit up more information about myself, www.fleurishventureslimited.com. And I'm going to leave it with Sharon for any final words, anywhere you want to direct people for more information about your services. I know we didn't get into the neurodiversity, but I have sort of 2 branches. So I do my consulting work, which includes this, and I've been consulting with folks on everything from medical cannabis and actually ketamine and other, the expanding world of
what we are now including into mental health treatments. And so I do that under my Sharon Blady and Associates. That's sharonblady.ca. And then I do work as somebody that's got lived experience with mental health and neurodiversity, and my involvement with psychology and mental health. And so that's under Speak Up Mental Health. And that's where some of my fangirl stuff that you can see here, Marvel and BTS Universe, that's where my geek girl comes in. And so I do fandom-based mental health services for folks at speak-up.co. So Speak Up. And so, yeah, no, it's, and yeah, we can have whole other conversations about the roles of, and that'd be what I look forward to, is the role of cannabis in terms of mental health. And again, you talked about it a little bit with your own background. There's a whole world out there that, again, there's a lot of mythology. There's a lot of wonderful things in terms of what is possible, and that we just have to, again, continue the research, continue the dialogue, and there's literally room for growth.
I'd love to have you back for an episode dedicated just to that, Sharon. You're the specialist on the mental health, and I can't see a 30 to 45 minutes, especially for mental health, featuring you again. Let's do it. Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. Likewise. Take care.